The wind never seemed to rest in Ash Hollow. It whistled through the cracks in every shutter, stirred the dust across the main road, and carried with it the sound of a town too small to forget its own rumors. The plain stretched endlessly around it, golden grass scorched to pale yellow under the relentless sun, the sky wide and pitiless. And at the far edge, where the land rose toward the dark pines, stood a small, weathered cottage. That was where Elara Quinn lived. She'd been alone there for almost 5 years. Some said she preferred it that way, that she kept to the woods because the curse she carried would harm anyone who came too close. Others whispered that she talked to spirits at night, that the fire that had burned her parents' barn had started from her very hands. Nobody ever said these things to her face, but Elara heard them all the same. In Ash Hollow, secrets were as common as dust, and they settled everywhere, even in her lungs. Each morning, she rose before dawn, her movements quiet and deliberate. She lit the small stove in her kitchen, boiled water from the well, and watched the steam rise into the cold morning air. Her cottage smelled faintly of sage and metal, a strange combination born from her work. She gathered herbs from the woods and crafted small charms, bits of wire and metal shaped into circles, stars, and leaves. Travelers bought them sometimes, believing they warded off bad luck. The townsfolk bought them too, though they'd never admit it. They'd drop coins on her table without meeting her eyes and leave before she could thank them. Elara didn't blame them anymore. Once, when she was younger, she'd shouted at them, demanded they see her for who she was, not what they feared. But that had only made the whispers worse. So now she spoke little, smiled less, and stayed on the edges of things. It was easier that way. That morning, the wind rattled her door again. The latch had grown weak, its metal bent from years of weather. She pressed her thumb against it and sighed. It wouldn't hold through another storm. She needed a new one, but she couldn't fix it herself this time. The hinge was cracked clean through. Her stomach tightened. That meant she'd have to go into town. By midday, she packed the broken latch into a cloth and tucked it into her basket beside a few bundles of dried thyme she meant to sell. Pulling her shawl over her hair, she started down the dirt path that led to Ash Hollow. The road wound through the prairie grass, where locusts leapt and the air shimmered with heat. She kept her eyes low, her steps steady. When she reached the main street, the world grew quieter. Conversations dimmed, boots shuffled. Someone muttered her name. "Elara Quinn?" a woman's voice said under her breath. "Still walking among us, is she?" Elara kept walking. She'd learned long ago that answering only gave them more to say. She passed the general store, the saloon, the old church with its cracked bell tower. The smell of coal and iron drifted from the end of the street, where the blacksmith's forge stood like a beating heart, loud, hot, alive. She hesitated at the edge of its open doorway. Inside, the air pulsed with the sound of hammer against anvil. Sparks leapt like fireflies. The man working there was broad-shouldered, his shirt damp with sweat, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. His movements were steady, almost rhythmic, as though each strike carried purpose beyond strength. He noticed her before she could speak. Turning from his work, he lifted his goggles, revealing eyes the color of cooled steel, gray, calm, assessing. "Something I can help you with, miss?" His voice was deep, but not unkind. Elara swallowed the dryness in her throat. She hesitated, realizing how foolish it felt to speak when every word might turn into gossip. "I need this repaired." She held out the small latch wrapped in cloth. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped closer. "Let's see." When his fingers brushed hers to take it, she almost flinched, not from fear, but from the simple shock of touch. It had been so long since anyone had taken something directly from her hand instead of from a table or the ground. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he chose not to. "This hinge is cracked," he said, inspecting it under the light. "I can forge a new one. Give me a few hours." She nodded. "How much?" He looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. "2 bits." Elara reached for her coin purse. The price was fair. Too fair. Most would have charged her double just for speaking to her. She placed the coins on the bench, expecting him to pull back or avoid her eyes, but he didn't. "I'm Silas Brandt," he said, returning to his work. You can wait if you'd like. There's shade out back. She blinked, uncertain. You don't mind? If I minded, he said, striking the metal again, I wouldn't have offered. The corner of her mouth almost lifted. Almost. She stepped outside to the back of the forge where a few apple trees grew, their leaves shimmering in the wind. Sitting on a wooden crate, she listened to the clang of his hammer echo through the air. Each strike sounded like something breaking, and something being made whole again. From the alley, 2 boys passed by, carrying a bucket of water. One of them noticed her and froze. That's her, he whispered loudly. The cursed one. Don't look at her, the other hissed. Ma says she brings bad luck. Their voices faded as they hurried off. Elara's hands tightened in her lap, the familiar ache settling in her chest. No matter what she did, the story of her name followed her like a shadow. By the time Silas emerged, the sun was lower and the air had cooled. He carried the latch, polished and strong, its new metal gleaming. Good as new, he said. She stood and reached for it. Thank you. He nodded once, then paused. Folks around here talk too much, he said quietly. Her breath caught. They always have. Doesn't mean they're right. His tone was simple, matter-of-fact, as if he were stating the weight of a nail. Then he handed her the latch. This'll hold through any storm now. Elara didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him that no one had ever said something like that to her, not since before the fire, before everything changed. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she said softly, I'll take care of it. I'm sure you will, he replied. Then, almost as an afterthought, you can come by any time you need repairs. Don't let the fools keep you from good work. Her chest warmed with something she hadn't felt in years. Gratitude that didn't hurt. I'll remember that. As she walked back toward the edge of town, she noticed a few people staring. Not openly, but sideways, like they couldn't understand why Silas Brandt, the respected blacksmith, had spoken kindly to her. She ignored them, clutching the latch to her chest. The metal was still warm from the forge, as if it carried some piece of his fire. The walk home felt different that evening. The wind was still sharp, the road still lonely, but something inside her was lighter. She watched the horizon fade to orange and gold, the last sunlight glinting off the repaired iron in her hands. For once, she didn't feel invisible. When she reached her cottage, she replaced the latch carefully, testing it against the doorframe. It fit perfectly. The sound it made when she closed it was solid, final, safe. She lit a candle and set it by the window. The shadows of the pines moved across the floor like slow water. She sat by the fire, her fingers tracing the edge of the new metal, thinking of the man who'd made it. His steady hands, his even voice, the way he hadn't looked away. Outside, the night thickened. A coyote called somewhere in the distance. She was about to douse the candle when she heard it. Low voices near her fence, the kind that made her blood run cold. She went to the forge today, one of them said. Aye, poor Silas, he don't know what he's brought on himself. Elara Quinn, another voice murmured, heavy with superstition. Even the blacksmith's forge can't burn off her curse. Their laughter faded into the dark. Elara sat still, her hands trembling. The candle flickered. For a moment, she almost believed them again, that maybe there was something in her touch that turned good things bad. But then she remembered Silas's words. Doesn't mean they're right. She drew a slow breath and stood, closing the door with her new latch. It clicked firmly, the sound echoing through her small home like a quiet promise. Outside, the wind rose again, whispering through the pines, but this time it didn't sound cruel. It sounded like something shifting. Something small, maybe, but real. And, as she lay down that night, the warmth of the forge still lingered in her memory, steady and bright, like the first spark in a long, cold winter. The days that followed passed quietly, but something had changed in the rhythm of Ash Hollow. It wasn't the wind or the dust or the endless stretch of summer skies. It was something smaller, something Elara felt each time she thought of the forge. The sound of hammer on steel still lingered in her mind, steady and strong, a rhythm that somehow silenced the whispers that used to echo in her chest. She hadn't planned to go back so soon, but the latch Silas made was perfect, and that perfection pulled at her thoughts every time she opened her door. She caught herself glancing at it more often than she should, as if the smooth curve of the new metal reminded her of the man who'd forged it. By the 5th day, she decided she needed more nails for repairs. It wasn't entirely true. She could have reused old ones, but the thought of seeing him again was reason enough. She wrapped a few coins in cloth and started down the dusty road before the sun reached its peak. Ash Hollow looked different that morning. The air shimmered with heat, and the distant clatter of horses echoed from the main street. When she passed the saloon, a man tipped his hat mockingly and muttered, "Careful, boys, the curse is out early." She didn't turn. Words couldn't break skin, not anymore. The forge was open, as always, the heat pressing out into the street. Silas was there, his hammer rising and falling in calm rhythm, the air bright with sparks. His apprentice, a freckled boy no older than 15, worked the bellows, sweat dripping down his neck. Silas looked up when she appeared in the doorway. His expression didn't change much, just a small tilt of his mouth, a quiet acknowledgement. "Morning, Miss Quinn." "Good morning," she said softly. "I came for nails. Strong ones, I expect." "They'll do more good than the ones I have." He nodded and turned toward the shelves behind him. "Tommy," he said to the boy, "fetch the iron box." The boy obeyed but hesitated when he saw who the order was for. His eyes flicked toward Elara, uncertain, nervous. Silas caught it instantly. "Go on," he said firmly. "She's not made of smoke." Tommy blinked, flushed, and handed the box over. Elara almost smiled. Silas opened it, selecting a handful of thick nails. "These should hold through wind and rain," he said. 2 bits a dozen. She placed her coins on the counter. He didn't hesitate to take them, didn't wipe his hands after, didn't flinch. When their fingers brushed again, she felt that same warmth from before, solid and real, like sunlight on her skin after too many winters. He watched her for a moment before returning to his work. "You fix things yourself?" "Yes," she said. "It's quieter that way." "Quieter's not always better." He turned the metal in the fire. "Sometimes a little noise keeps the dark away." Elara wasn't sure what to make of that. The rhythm of his hammer filled the space between them. The sound wasn't harsh. It was alive, steady, comforting. She stood there longer than she meant to, watching the sparks leap into the air. When she finally turned to leave, Silas called after her. "Miss Quinn." She paused. He set his hammer down, his face serious but not cold. "If you ever need something fixed, anything, you come here. Don't wait until it's falling apart." Her throat tightened. "That might give them more to talk about." "Let them talk," he said. "They'll find someone else soon enough. They always do." Something inside her broke and healed all at once at those words. For years she'd tried to disappear so the gossip would die, but he said it as if her existence didn't need defending. She wanted to thank him, but the words came out too quiet. "You shouldn't stand up for me." "I'm not standing up for you," he said simply. "I'm standing where right belongs." When she walked away this time, the sound of the hammer followed her again. But it didn't echo like before. It pulsed. That afternoon, as she passed the general store, she noticed 2 women whispering near the window. Their eyes flicked toward her, then away. "She's been seen at the forge again," one said. "Poor Silas doesn't know she'll ruin him next." The other woman shushed her, but her expression was the same mix of fear and curiosity Elara had seen 1,000 times. She kept walking, pretending not to hear, but the words clawed at her heart. Back home, she mended the fence behind her cottage. Each nail she drove into the wood made her think of Silas's forge, the rhythm of his hammer, the heat of his fire. She wondered what it must be like to create something from raw iron, to shape chaos into strength. She'd only ever known how to endure, never how to make. As dusk settled, the air turned heavy with the promise of rain. She lit a lamp and worked until the sky turned gray. Then she heard footsteps outside. Her pulse jumped. Visitors were rare. When she opened the door, Silas stood there, his hat damp from the humidity, a wrapped bundle in his hands. "You left without your change," he said. She blinked. "I paid what you asked." He nodded. "You paid too much." He handed her a small pouch. Inside were 3 coins and something else, a small piece of iron shaped into a circle, engraved with a star. "I made it from the scraps," he said. "For your trouble last time." Elara stared at it. "You didn't have to." "I know." He tipped his hat, already turning to leave. "But I wanted to." Before he reached the path, she called out, "Why?" He stopped. The evening light caught his shoulders, outlining him against the sky. "Because people should remember kindness, not curses." She stood in the doorway long after he'd gone, her fingers curled around the little charm. It was cool and solid, the lines smooth beneath her thumb. For the first time in years, she cried, not out of pain, but because someone had given her something that wasn't born of pity or fear. The rain broke that night. Thunder rolled across the plains and lightning flashed over the trees. She placed the charm above her window, the iron gleaming each time the sky lit up. When the wind howled through the eaves, the latch Silas had forged held firm. The next morning she found muddy footprints near her fence. A small wagon had broken its wheel in the storm. The owner, a rancher named Burke, stood beside it, cursing under his breath. Elara hesitated, then approached. "You need help?" He turned sharply, scowling when he saw her. "No, ma'am, I don't need none of your kind of help." She ignored the sting in his voice. "The axle's cracked," she said. "If you prop it with wood, you can make it to town." Burke glared, but looked anyway. She was right. He grunted and cut a piece from the fence post. As he worked, she held the wheel steady. He didn't thank her, but when he climbed back onto the wagon, he didn't curse her either. Later that day, as she walked through town to sell herbs, she saw him speaking to others outside the saloon. Their faces turned toward her as she passed. Some looked uneasy, others thoughtful, a few ashamed. She didn't know what was said, but she caught one word: helped. By evening, she reached the forge again. She didn't mean to stop, but her feet carried her there. The glow from the open doorway spilled into the street. Silas was bent over the anvil, his arms bare, his movements sure. Tommy sat nearby, wiping sweat from his brow. When he saw her, he smiled shyly. "Evening, Miss Quinn." "Evening," she said softly. Silas glanced up. "The latch holding?" "Better than ever." "Good." He quenched the hot metal in water, the hiss sharp and loud. "You came to test my work again?" She almost smiled. "Maybe." He laughed quietly, the sound low and genuine. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment." Tommy spoke then, breaking the silence. "Mr. Brandt says you know herbs. My ma's been coughing at night." Elara knelt, her voice gentle. "Boil some thyme and honey together. Tell her to breathe the steam, not drink it." The boy nodded, eyes wide. "Thank you, ma'am." When he ran off, Silas leaned against the anvil. "You didn't have to help him." "Neither did you," she replied. His smile was faint. "Touché!" The forge quieted as the sun went down. The last of the light turned the air copper red. Elara stood there, uncertain what to do with the calm that settled between them. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. He reached for a bucket of water and poured it over the coals. Steam rose, curling around them in soft gray waves. "You should head home before dark," he said. "Storm's coming again. I'll manage." He handed her a lantern from the shelf. "Take this anyway." "I can't." "You can." His tone left no room for argument. She took it, the glass warm from his hand. "You're kind, Silas." "Just doing what I'd want someone to do for me." When she reached her cottage, she lit the lantern again. Its glow filled the small room, softer than candlelight, steadier than the wind. She set it by the window beside the charm he'd made, and sat for a long time just watching it flicker. That night, the gossip grew louder in town. She heard it the next day when she came for supplies, the laughter behind her back, the warning looks. "They say he's under her spell," one man sneered as she passed. "Won't be long before the forge burns down too." Elara clenched her jaw but kept walking. The storekeeper hesitated to take her money, then did so quickly, avoiding her eyes. When she left, Silas was across the street, loading metal into a wagon. He looked up, saw her expression, and frowned. He crossed the road, wiping his hands on his apron. "Who was it this time?" She shook her head. "Doesn't matter." "It does." His voice was low, steady. "They've no right. They're afraid. That's all they know how to be." He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "And you? What are you?" She hesitated. "Tired." Something in that word hit him. He reached out, as if to touch her arm, but stopped himself. "If they can't see who you are, they're the cursed ones." She looked up, surprised by the quiet fire in his voice. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind stirred dust between them, carrying faint laughter from the saloon. Then she turned away, afraid her face might betray what her heart already knew, that she was beginning to care about someone who dared to see her as human. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she stood outside her cottage and watched the sky burn with color. The air smelled of rain again, but she didn't mind. Inside, the lantern still burned steady, its light golden against the dark. And somewhere in town, the blacksmith's hammer struck metal, each echo a heartbeat that seemed to travel through the wind, all the way to where she stood, strong, sure, unafraid. For the first time in years, Elara didn't feel like she was waiting for her world to end. She felt like it had just begun. The heat came early that summer, pressing down on Ash Hollow like a hand that wouldn't lift. The ground cracked, the wells dipped low, and the air shimmered with the kind of dryness that made even the crows go quiet. It was the kind of season that made tempers short and whispers long, and when the land grew desperate, so did the people. Elara felt it in the way the town looked at her again, more sharply now, as though they needed someone to blame for the parched fields and the dying grass. She could feel their eyes even when her back was turned. Every creak of her porch felt like a warning. Every cough in the distance sounded like accusation. Still, she went about her days quietly. The herbs she dried wilted faster now, and the soil near her cottage turned hard as iron. But she refused to give in to despair. She gathered what she could, sold what she had to, and fixed what broke. Silas still greeted her each time she came to the forge, his voice steady as ever, his face calm, even when others turned away. He didn't care that people watched. If he noticed their stares, he never mentioned them. One afternoon, when the sky was white and flat with heat, Elara found herself standing near the well behind the blacksmith's workshop. The forge roared like a living thing, its heat rolling through the open doorway. She carried a bundle of dried mint and thyme she'd brought as a trade, small gifts to cool the air. Silas looked up from his work as she approached, his hair damp with sweat, his shirt clinging to his shoulders. "Careful," he said. "You'll melt standing there." "I've survived worse," she said, offering a faint smile. He took the herbs, breathing in the scent. "These smell better than iron and smoke." "That's not a hard standard to beat." He chuckled softly. True enough. When he laughed, it wasn't loud, but it changed the room, like sunlight cutting through dust. He placed the herbs near the open window, then looked at her again. "They're saying this heat will break soon. Storm's coming." Elara frowned. "A storm after this much drought?" He shrugged. "Could be rough. You should check your roof. These old cottages don't take kindly to wind." "I'll manage," she said. "I know you will," he replied. "But that doesn't mean you should do it alone." Before she could answer, a shout echoed from the street. A man burst through the doorway, red-faced and angry. It was Burke, the rancher she'd helped weeks before. "Brandt," he said, pointing a shaking finger toward Elara. "You'd best stop talking to her. She's the reason my cattle dropped dead last night." Silas straightened, his jaw tightening. "You think a woman can kill cattle with a look. I think, wherever she goes, bad things follow." Burke spat on the floor. "I should have known better than to let her near my land." Elara didn't move. She'd heard this before, too many times. But something about hearing it in front of Silas felt different, sharper, heavier. Silas stepped forward. "You lost your herd because the ground's cracked and there's no rain. Don't go blaming someone who's done nothing but help you." Burke's face darkened. "You don't know what she is." "I know enough," Silas said. "And I know a coward when I see one." The room fell silent, except for the hiss of the forge. Burke's mouth twisted, but he didn't answer. He turned, muttering curses as he left. Elara stood there, her heart pounding. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "I don't regret it," Silas replied. "Let them talk. I'm tired of their fear. They'll turn on you next. Then let them try." The words were simple, but they struck deep. She wanted to tell him not to risk himself for her, but she saw the set of his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes, and she knew he wouldn't be swayed. That night, the wind began to rise. It started with a low hum through the grass, then grew into a deep, restless moan that swept across the plains. Clouds gathered in the distance, dark, swelling, heavy with promise. The air smelled of dust and lightning. Elara stood on her porch, staring toward town. The sky flickered in the west. She knew Silas would be at the forge, securing tools, covering the fire. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and started down the path. By the time she reached the main street, the wind had turned wild, whipping grit into her face. The bell atop the church tower clanged in the gusts, its sound swallowed by thunder. Then lightning struck. It hit the church steeple like a sword, splitting the sky with blinding light. A moment later, fire bloomed, orange and hungry, climbing fast through the dry wood. Shouts rose across town. People ran for buckets, for water, for anything they could carry. Elara didn't think. She ran toward the flames. The air burned her lungs as she climbed the hill. Sparks fell like rain, catching in her hair. The townsfolk were shouting, panicking, frozen between fear and action. She pushed through them, her voice hoarse. "Form a line! From the well!" They stared at her but didn't move, until Silas appeared beside her carrying 2 full buckets. "You heard her," he barked. "Move!" His voice broke the spell. Men and women scrambled, forming a chain up the hill. Silas handed her 1 bucket, keeping the other for himself. Together they climbed, tossing water at the flames. The heat was unbearable. Smoke clawed at her eyes. The church door groaned as fire chewed through the beams. But still she worked, filling, lifting, pouring, again and again. Silas was beside her the whole time, his movements steady, even as his arms bled from flying debris. When part of the roof collapsed, she screamed his name, but he was already there, dragging a beam away before it could fall. The fire roared, the storm raged, and through it all they didn't stop. Hours passed before the rain came. When it did, it came hard. Sheets of water fell from the heavens, hissing as they hit the burning wood. The flames sputtered, then died, leaving behind smoke and ash and the heavy smell of wet soot. Elara stood there, trembling, her dress soaked, her hair plastered to her face. Silas dropped the bucket and turned to her. In the flickering light, his face was streaked with ash, his eyes fierce and alive. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "I think so." He took her hand without thinking, his palm rough and warm even through the rain. "Let's get you out of here." They walked down the hill together as the townsfolk stared. For once, no one spoke. The fire had silenced even the worst tongues. At the bottom of the hill, she stumbled. He caught her, his arm around her shoulders, holding her steady. The closeness made her heart ache, not from fear, but from something deeper, something long buried. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the cut along his forearm. "I've had worse." He gave a faint smile. "You saved half this town tonight. They'll still blame me tomorrow. Then I'll remind them who threw the first bucket." He led her to her cottage through the rain. Inside, he helped her sit by the fire while he found a cloth and wrapped his arm. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with things neither dared to say. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Why do you keep helping me?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because you deserve better than what they've given you." She lowered her gaze. "You'll lose their respect." "I'd rather lose their respect than my own." The rain drummed softly against the roof. She stared at the way the light flickered across his face, the shadows tracing the curve of his jaw, the scar near his temple. He looked tired, but unbroken, strong in a way that had nothing to do with muscle. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. I should thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me that there's still something good worth fighting for in this place." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him what those words meant, but the air between them was too full, too fragile. So she said nothing. She just watched him as he leaned back in the chair, his eyes closing for a moment. When he finally rose to leave, dawn was just beginning to break. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. He paused at the door. "You should rest." "I will." He hesitated. "If the town gives you trouble—" "I've survived worse storms," she said softly. He gave a small nod. "Maybe, but this time you don't have to do it alone." Then he was gone. Elara sat there long after, listening to the quiet. Outside, the birds began to stir, their calls soft and tentative. She looked toward the window, where the faintest line of gold had begun to edge the horizon. Her door latch, his latch, gleamed faintly in the morning light. She stood, crossed the room, and touched the cool metal. It was solid beneath her fingers, unyielding, steady, like the man who'd made it. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not because the curse was gone, but because someone had looked at her and seen something other than fear. She closed her eyes and let the warmth spread through her chest. The storm had taken much, but it had also given her something she hadn't known she was still searching for: hope. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper, and the wind carried the faint scent of iron and smoke across the plains. Somewhere in town, the forge fire would be burning again, and she knew, without question, that she would see him soon. And maybe, just maybe, this time, she wouldn't walk alone. Morning in Ash Hollow came with the smell of rain-soaked ash. The church steeple stood blackened but unbroken, its charred frame a stark mark against the pale sky. For once, the town was quiet. No one spoke of curses that day, not while smoke still curled above the roof of the church. People nodded to Elara when she passed, not kindly, not warmly, but not with fear either. It was a silence that almost felt like peace. For 3 days, that peace held. Elara worked in her garden, pulling weeds that had sprung after the storm. The earth was soft again, rich with moisture. Birds returned to the edge of the forest, their calls light and clean. She caught herself humming sometimes, something she hadn't done in years. The melody was faint and without words, but it filled the empty corners of her cottage like sunlight. Silas came by once to check the roof. The wind had torn away a few shingles, and he insisted on fixing them himself. She tried to argue, but he only smiled, climbed the ladder, and worked in silence while she brewed tea. When he climbed down, his shirt was streaked with soot, his hands rough with new cuts. "You didn't have to," she said as she handed him a mug. "I told you I would," he said simply. "A promise is a promise." She looked at him, her chest aching with something she didn't have a name for. His eyes were the color of storm clouds before rain, soft, steady, unafraid. They drank tea together on her porch as the afternoon light dimmed. The smell of wet earth filled the air. For a little while, the world felt right. But peace never stayed long in Ash Hollow. On the 4th morning, word spread that young Clara Dobbs, the rancher's niece, had fallen ill, feverish, weak, delirious. The doctor said it was a common sickness brought by spoiled water, but gossip needed no proof. By noon, whispers were already twisting through the streets again. "She was near the Quinn place 2 days ago," someone murmured at the general store. "They say she touched one of Elara's charms," another said. "Lord have mercy," came a third. "That woman's curse ain't finished yet." By evening, the whispers turned into talk, and the talk turned into movement. Men gathered outside the saloon, voices rising with every drink poured. The word witch was said more than once. Elara heard it before they reached her. She was inside, grinding herbs, when a knock came at her door, sharp, deliberate, the kind that carried no courtesy. She opened it to find Sheriff Doyle standing there, hat in hand, his face uneasy. Behind him, 2 townsmen shifted their weight, their eyes avoiding hers. "Elara," Doyle began, his voice careful. "There's talk again, about the sickness, about you." She said nothing. She didn't need to. "You know how folks are," he went on. "Superstitious. Afraid. They think if you left town for a while, it might calm things down." Her throat went dry. "You want me to leave?" "I'm asking you to," he said, "just until things settle." Her fingers tightened around the doorframe. "And if I don't?" He sighed. "Then I can't promise your safety." She looked past him, at the two men behind him, Burke among them, his expression smug and cruel. "So that's it then. I stay and they come for me?" Doyle hesitated, shame flickering in his eyes. "I don't want trouble. You already brought it." A shadow fell across the road before anyone could speak again. Silas was walking toward them, his stride measured, his eyes locked on the sheriff. The late sun caught the edge of his shoulders, turning him into a dark shape against the light. "Trouble's already here," he said. "Silas," Doyle said, lifting a hand, "stay out of this." "No," Silas said, his voice even but sharp. "Not this time." He stepped up beside Elara, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, steady and grounding. "You want her gone because people can't face their own fear. That's cowardice, Doyle, not law." Burke spat on the dirt. "She's poison, Brandt. You'll see soon enough." "Funny," Silas said, his eyes hard. "You said the same thing before she saved your life at the church." Burke's face flushed, but he said nothing. Silas turned back to the sheriff. "She's not leaving. Not while I'm here." The air between them felt heavy, as if even the wind had stopped to listen. Doyle looked from Silas to Elara, then finally nodded. "Then I hope you're ready to deal with what comes next." He turned and walked away, the others following close behind. When they were gone, Elara exhaled shakily. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "I told you before," he said, looking at her. "I don't regret standing where right belongs. They'll come after you now. Let them." His tone softened. "They've been chasing ghosts long enough. Maybe it's time they saw a man instead." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "You can't fight the whole town, Silas." "I don't have to. I just have to stand my ground." He stepped closer then, his voice quieter. "You've been standing alone for too long. Let me take some of the weight." Her eyes burned. "I don't know if I can." "Then lean until you can." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. That night, the town didn't sleep. Lanterns burned late into the dark and angry voices drifted from the saloon. But Elara's cottage stayed quiet. Silas refused to leave her alone, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees. The moonlight cast long shadows over the trees, and every time the wind stirred, the porch boards creaked softly beneath his boots. Inside, Elara couldn't rest. She paced by the window, watching him through the thin curtain. He sat steady, unmoving, the glow of his lantern painting a golden halo around his profile. She realized then that she'd never seen anyone look so calm in the face of so much noise. When dawn came, the storm of talk began to die. Clara Dobbs's fever broke, and by mid-morning she was sitting up, eating broth. The doctor announced it was no curse, only bad water, but the truth always moved slower than lies. Still, word spread, and little by little, the tension eased. Men who'd sworn to drive Elara out avoided her eyes when they passed. The sheriff never returned. Silas came by at midday, exhaustion written in the slump of his shoulders. "Looks like the town's found someone else to blame," he said with a dry smile. She handed him a cup of water. "And you?" "I'm still here." He took a long drink. "And so are you." "I almost left," she admitted. "I had a bag packed." He set the cup down, his eyes steady on hers. "Then I'm glad I got here when I did." She looked away, embarrassed. "You don't know what they've said about you." He stepped closer. "I don't care what they've said. I care about what's true." Her breath caught. "And what's that?" "That you're not cursed," he said softly. "You're brave. You're stubborn. You're kind. You've been stronger than any of them for years." Her voice trembled. "You make me sound like something worth saving." "You are," he said simply. The words hung between them, bright and heavy as sunlight after a storm. She didn't speak, couldn't. The air felt fragile, sacred somehow. Silas broke it gently, glancing toward the porch. "Your steps are loose," he said. "I'll fix them this afternoon." "You don't have to." "I know." His smile was faint, almost shy. "But I want to." By the time the sun set, the new steps were finished, smooth, sturdy, carved from oak he'd brought himself. When he tested them, they didn't creak. She stood behind him, hands clasped, heart full. "You fix everything you touch," she said. He looked at her over his shoulder, a small spark in his eyes. "Maybe not everything, but I try." She wanted to say something more, to tell him how much it meant, how his presence had rebuilt more than just wood and nails, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but he turned toward her then, and for a heartbeat, the whole world went still. The air smelled of sawdust and rain. Somewhere far off, a whippoorwill called. And between them, there was only quiet understanding, the kind that didn't need to be spoken. When he finally left that night, the porch light still burned, casting warmth over the new steps. Elara stood there long after he was gone, her heart steady, her fears quiet. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. Behind her, the latch clicked softly as she closed the door. The sound was sure, final, unbroken, and somewhere down the road, Silas walked through the dark, the faintest smile on his lips. He didn't know what the next day would bring, whether the town would change for good or not, but he knew this much. He'd found something worth fighting for, and he wasn't about to let it go. The days after the storm felt different in Ash Hollow. The air smelled cleaner, the sky clearer. The black scars on the church steeple had faded to a dull brown, and the bells rang again on Sunday mornings. When Elara passed through town, people no longer looked away. Some nodded. Some even smiled. It wasn't sudden, this change. It crept in quietly, like dawn. The woman who used to cross the street when Elara came by now paused to wave. The butcher began to count her change into her hand instead of dropping it onto the counter. Even the children, once taught to run, began to linger near her fence, peeking through to watch her hang herbs or feed the doves that nested on her roof. But the person who changed most was Elara herself. For so long, she had moved through life as though every step were borrowed, as though the world could take it back without warning. Now she felt the ground steady beneath her feet. When she looked into the mirror each morning, she didn't see a ghost anymore. She saw a woman still scarred, still weary, but alive. And more than that, she saw someone worth being seen. Silas came by often. At first, it was under the pretense of fixing things. The porch railing, the gate hinge, the loose floorboard by the hearth. But when there was nothing left to mend, he still came. Sometimes he brought bread or apples. Sometimes he brought nothing but himself. And that was enough. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, sharing tea or silence. The air between them had grown easy, comfortable, full of unspoken warmth. Tommy, the apprentice, had started calling her Miss Elara and brought her flowers from the field behind the forge. She began helping him polish horseshoes and clean tools when she stopped by. The forge no longer felt like a place she wasn't supposed to enter. It felt like somewhere she belonged. Then came word that the town fair would return. It had been canceled the previous year because of drought and fear, but with the rains returning and the harvest promising green, spirits lifted again. The preacher called it a celebration of survival. Elara wasn't sure she should go. She told Silas as much one evening when he mentioned the fair while tightening a hinge on her door. "They'll all be there," she said quietly. "Some still don't want me around." He glanced at her, his tone calm. "Most of them owe you more than they realize. People don't like remembering what they owe." He smiled faintly. "Then go for yourself. You've hidden long enough." "I'm not hiding." "You've been surviving," he said softly. "There's a difference." She wanted to argue, but couldn't. His words hung in the air between them, steady and true. When the day of the fair arrived, the town square was bright with color. Ribbons hung from every post, and the smell of roasted corn and baked bread drifted through the air. Fiddles played near the stage, laughter rising above the music. Children ran between stalls, and women fanned themselves beneath the afternoon sun. Elara stood at the edge of the crowd, her shawl drawn around her shoulders. The sounds and smells of life felt almost overwhelming after so many quiet years. People turned when they saw her, but instead of fear, there was curiosity and something softer. She caught sight of Silas near the forge's display stall, showing a farmer the curve of a new plow blade. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, his arms darkened by sun and work. When he saw her, he stopped mid-sentence. A small smile touched his lips, slow and certain, as though her being there was exactly what he'd been waiting for. He crossed the street toward her, his steps unhurried but sure. "You came," he said. "You told me not to hide." "I did." He offered his arm. "Then you'd best let me do the walking with you." She hesitated, conscious of the eyes watching. Then, slowly, she placed her hand on his arm. His sleeve was warm beneath her fingers, the muscle beneath steady as the earth. Together, they walked past the stalls. People greeted him, and to her surprise, they greeted her too. Some nodded politely, some offered cautious smiles. A few even thanked her for helping during the fire. She felt her heart open, inch by inch, as if each word loosened something that had been tied too tight for too long. By sunset, lanterns glowed across the square. The fiddles played slower tunes now, the kind that called couples to the open space in front of the church. Elara stood at the edge of the crowd again, watching the swaying pairs. Silas stood beside her, his gaze steady on the dance floor. "You don't dance, do you?" she asked softly. "I do," he said, "but not often. And when you do—" He looked at her then, a spark in his gray eyes. "Only when it's worth it." She felt her cheeks warm. "You shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because they're still watching." "Let them." He turned to face her fully, holding out his hand. "Dance with me, Elara." The air seemed to still. Even the music felt quieter for a heartbeat. She hesitated, but the look in his eyes was not one that demanded. It invited. She took his hand. His fingers wrapped around hers, firm and sure. He led her into the open square, the crowd parting without a word. The music rose again, slow and lilting. Silas moved with calm ease, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. Elara had not danced since she was a girl, before loss and whispers and loneliness had taught her to move only when unseen. But here, under the lantern light, with his hand steady against her back, her body remembered. They moved in quiet rhythm, the world narrowing to the space between them. The murmurs faded. The eyes watching no longer mattered. There was only the sound of the fiddle, the soft brush of his thumb against her hand, the warmth of his breath near her temple. When the song ended, neither of them let go right away. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was reverent, filled with something fragile and sacred. Then, slowly, they stepped apart. Someone began clapping, then another. Soon, the whole square joined in, laughter rising like birds startled from the trees. Elara's eyes widened, but Silas only smiled and bowed slightly toward her, as if she were the reason for all of it. That night, the fair ended with fireworks. From the edge of the field, they stood side by side, watching streaks of gold and red light the sky. Each burst reflected in her eyes, bright and fleeting. "Do you still believe in curses?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not anymore." "Good," he said, "because I was starting to think mine might be falling in love with you." Her breath caught, but before she could answer, he reached for her hand again, fingers twining with hers. "Don't say anything," he murmured. "You don't have to." The fireworks cracked above them, painting the night in color. She turned toward him, her heart full. For once, she didn't feel the need to hide her smile. The following weeks passed in gentle rhythm. The forge grew busier, and Elara began helping more often. She kept the shelves tidy, organized orders, and learned to polish metal until it gleamed like silver. Tommy teased her that she made the place look too fine for rough men, and Silas only said, "Maybe that's what we needed all along." The town grew used to seeing her there. The fear had melted, replaced by quiet acceptance. When someone dropped off a new order, they spoke to her as easily as they did to Silas. On the first cool morning of autumn, he came to her cottage early. The sky was pale, the air sharp. He carried something in his hands wrapped in linen. "What's that?" she asked. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small iron ring, delicate, hand-forged, with a single twist like a vine around its band. "I made it from the same metal as your latch," he said. "Strong, simple, honest, like the woman it's for." Her breath trembled. "Silas, I don't have much to offer," he said. "But what I have is yours, my work, my name, my life." Tears filled her eyes. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "Yes." He smiled, that quiet, steady smile that always reached his eyes, and slipped the ring onto her finger. They married a month later, beside the forge. It wasn't grand, but it was full of warmth. The townsfolk gathered, some out of curiosity, some out of guilt, most out of genuine affection. The preacher's voice carried softly through the autumn air, and when he said, "Speak your vows," Silas took her hands and said only, "I found her in the fire, and I will keep her in the light." Elara's voice shook as she answered, "And I will stand with you through every storm." When they kissed, the forge bell rang and the crowd cheered. Even the children who once feared her threw flowers at her feet. As twilight fell, she stood beside Silas at the doorway of their new home, a small cabin built beside the forge, its windows glowing with golden light. The smell of metal and pine mixed in the cool evening air. He slipped an arm around her waist. "Home suits you," he murmured. She leaned into him. "I never thought I'd have one again." "You made it," he said. "Every time you refused to let them break you, you built another piece of it." She looked up at him, smiling through tears. "You fixed more than my door, Silas Brandt." He kissed her forehead. "You fixed me, too." Night settled softly over Ash Hollow. The wind that once carried cruel words now carried laughter and music from the nearby saloon. The people of the town would tell stories for years about the woman once called Cursed and the blacksmith who saw her differently. And if anyone ever asked whether the curse was real, those who knew the truth would only smile and say, "Maybe," but if it was, he broke it with love. Inside the small cabin, the fire burned bright, its light dancing across their joined hands. Outside, the forge glowed red against the dark, steady and strong, the heartbeat of a life reborn. Elara sat beside Silas, her head on his shoulder, listening to the crackle of the fire. For the first time in forever, the world was quiet, not with fear, but with peace. She closed her eyes, and the last thing she heard before sleep took her was his voice, low and certain, whispering, "You were never cursed, Elara. You were a blessing the world was too blind to see." And as the embers faded to gold, she smiled, because she finally believed it too. In a town haunted by fear and superstition, Elara Quinn and Silas Brandt proved that love, patient, steadfast, and unyielding, can mend even the deepest scars. From whispers of curses to the warmth of a shared hearth, they taught Ash Hollow that the truest kind of strength isn't found in iron or fire, but in a heart that refuses to give up on hope. Their love became the quiet legend of the plains, proof that no soul is too broken to be loved, and no heart too cursed to be saved. If you were moved by Elara and Silas's story, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every tale brings you back to the dust, the passion, and the timeless love stories of the Old West. Saddle up for more heartwarming journeys of courage, redemption, and love that defies the odds. Subscribe now and let the next story ride straight into your heart.